All right, so we are going to get started. You'll open your Bibles. We're going to read Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and we'll be starting with the first 8 verses. There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Are you hearing me in my repeated sing-songy format? All right? All of this is in presentation by Solomon of a poem. So in verse 1, where does Solomon take his focus? So he's been talking about leaving a legacy and how that was his final thing of saying, I didn't find it there. Didn't find it in wisdom. I didn't find it in wealth. I didn't find it in all my activities. I couldn't even find it in leaving a legacy. So it's not there. That's not was never the answer to the question. So in verse 1, where does he take the focus? He says, there is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. 2 different things. So first, what is the measurement that he gives us to look at in that very beginning of verse 1? What's the measuring tool you see the word used for? Time. But what kind of time? Not just any old time, but appointed time. So that's what he's going to be looking into, is this appointed time. Man's life is contained in time, and God is outside of time. Does that make sense? Do I have to explain that? Is that a big thing? God was there before time began. He's here in every moment as time unfolds, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, and he will be in eternity. Man was created at a particular point in time, and our lives are lived in a particular point in time. Right? So we live in this century. We didn't live last century or the century before. So we are in our appointed time in terms of creation and when we're here. So the time is not arbitrary that he's referring to here. It is appointed. And the definition, this would be a good time maybe if you were doing your own study to go and look up, well, what does appointed mean? So you could, if you've got software to do this or books that help you do that, you would type in appointed time. And you would see where that phrase is used throughout the scriptures to get a full idea of what does appointed time mean. How is it used in the scriptures? And there's a lot of them. So don't worry about me sitting here and read them all to you because there were too many. But the idea is very specific. Things don't happen in an arbitrary fashion. Everything has its appointed time. So this would also be where you could do the definition. So you can define it by seeing where it's used in Scripture or just looking up the definition, which the definition of appointed is predetermined, arranged, or set. So there is a predetermined time when everything is going to happen. First, we learn the time is appointed. Then we learn that this was true for everything. But the clarification for everything was what in that verse? We had under heaven, but that I'm looking for the next thing. What is the thing that he refers to being appointed? Not just it's in time is the appointment, but for every event, right? So every event, every activity, everything that's supposed to happen has its appointed time, and the clarification was under the heaven. And what did we determine that was significant to point us to? Things here on earth. There's above the sun or heavenly, and then there's under the sun, and here in the temporal world. So everything in the temporal world that we know of exists in time, and everything that happens in that time happens in its appointed time. For any of you who like to do puzzles, it fits right in a spot. Every event. All right, so to give the details of just how inclusive this concept of God's control, Solomon proceeds with this unique poetic style. So here's a new word for you, or for me, I should say. The style was referred to as merisms. Have you heard of a merism before? I hadn't heard of a merism before. So we're going to learn about what a merism is, and then we're going to see how it's applied here. M-E-R-I-S-M. M is in Mary. Merism. Both ends. M-E-R-I-S-M. Merism. And I went to the ever-faithful source of Wikipedia to look that up for you and to give you a concise definition. It is a linguistic phenomenon in which a combination of two contrasting parts of the whole refer to the whole. It is where, well, the whole, every one of those verses will give that to you. We're going to unpack what it looks like. Two contrasting parts of something don't just refer to the contrasting parts of the something, it refers to the whole of the something. Okay? Let's see, let's do an example that's something that we might say. Someone who might be searching everywhere, when you ask them, they might say, I have searched high and low. Did they only search high and then only search low? They searched everywhere, high and low, but when they use the terms, we know that it means the whole of everything. Again, can I stress for you, because this has been translated into English, we might lose some of what was there in the merism as Solomon was using it in his language to what that culture would be familiar with. However, I will say, enough of it comes through that we'll get the concept of everything that is in its appointed time. And that's where Solomon is going to go now. Actually, I wanted to give you a couple of examples where this is used in other places in the Bible, because it wasn't just Solomon right here doing it. So if you looked at Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Did he only create the heavens and the earth? Those are the extremes. He created everything in between, everything in the heavens and everything on the earth. So we get the heavens and the earth, but we know that means everything in between. And then we can go to the last book in Revelation. We have Revelation chapter 22, verse 13, where we hear, this is speaking of Christ, I am the Alpha and the Omega. In case that didn't help us, he says, the first and the last, right? The beginning and the end. All right, so is he only the Alpha and Omega? What is Alpha and Omega? That's another thing. Does anybody not know what that is? So the Alpha is the symbol that's the first Greek letter, or the Greek alphabet, it's the first letter, and Omega is the last one. So when he says it, he's not saying, well, I'm the A and the Z. He's like, no, I'm everything in between. That's a merism. So see, you knew a merism, you just didn't know it was called a merism. All right, so in Genesis, we see the use of heaven and earth that created, and in Revelation, we see it emphasized everything in between. So back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 2, let's head into this. So what merism does Solomon begin with? He says a time to give birth, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to uproot. So Solomon is using the events of creating and ending all life back to the conclusion that God has an appointed time for each. Does that make sense? Every one of them. Were you in control of the day that you were born? It was an appointed time, according to Solomon, and God was in control. Are you going to be in control of the last day? Solomon says God is in control of the last day. Always appointed time. In verse 3, what does Solomon describe next? There's a time to kill and a time to heal. Oh my gosh, the commentaries, lady. Whew, they just go off in all kinds of places. A time to tear down and a time to build up. So what do you think that means? What's that? Got destroy and repair going on. So to kill and to heal. What is to kill? To destroy it, whatever it is, right? God's in control of that. So he has an appointed time when something will happen that we would consider to be him putting an end to something. Now, we like to think of that in terms of just a person. Oh, he killed a person. Right? This is kill as in the conclusion of something, the taking down of something. It can be an idea. It can be a time period. It can be, right, a kingdom. It can be, right, there's a time for that, and then there's the time that you heal it, you extend it, you let it move on. So in the merism, I think sometimes we need to step back a little bit because, right, we get myopic in the use of that word in the tiniest way. And I'm saying we need to broaden how that term is used. And I do that quite a bit as I look through this. So that's just one idea. So don't narrow in your mind to one thing. Kill is, in the big picture, to finish something. Heal is something that you extend the life of something. And to tear down and to build up, that most people are okay with that one. That doesn't really, blow our minds, right? There's a time when you build something and time for it to come down, and maybe you build something else, right? Verse 4, what scope of emotional responses does man have to these events? A time to weep and a time to laugh and a time to mourn and a time to dance. Those are all pretty self-explanatory, right? That's the gamut of our emotions. Is there a time when I'm not weeping and not laughing? Is there a appointed time for that as well? Right. Everything in between is included. All the emotions that man can have towards something, there's an appointed time, an appropriate time for those things. Time for mourning, time to dance, just another form of that, right? Mourning usually happens again at a time when we're feeling really, really down, where dancing normally happens when we're really, really up or happy. Some people shouldn't be seen dancing in public, by the way. All right, verse 5. How does man respond to events in life? A time to throw stones and a time to gather. Now, this one we might spend a little more time on just because how it was used in this time period, in this culture, we might miss, right? Because we're not in that culture. Most of you don't spend your days gathering stones and other days tossing stones away. So I'm thinking we might miss some of that. So what is the picture being made of dispensing stones and gathering the stones? It would be of building things, and when you go out to land, let's say you're going to plant even your little garden, all right? And we're talking, he had much bigger events. What do you have to do when you start doing that? You got to go move all the stones, right? Clear them out. So it's a preparation for whatever it is you're going to build, whether it be your garden or your house or your shed or whatever it is. What's the tossing of the stones? What's the gathering of the stones? Usually it's you gather to build. I don't know if you've been to Ireland where you go and you can just see these lines of stones that are the marking of people's property lines. So they gathered the stones to make the land usable. So they took them from where they were, they gathered them up, and they made a wall. And we see that in all kinds of places, even historically with Israel, when they would build things. They would gather the stones together and they would build the temple, or they would build this. And we see where sometimes those were torn down and something else was built. All right, so there's an appropriate time for all of that and everything in between. The building and the taking down and everything that's in between. Verse 5, what is described? A time to embrace and a time to shun embrace. And I would say in our current world, we are shunning embraces. Actually, when I was trying to figure out what to teach, I kind of read through this as it had been suggested, and I got to that verse and I went, that's the book we're going to study. That verse right there did it for me. There is a time. And what does it mean to embrace? Okay. We often think just in the physical. Okay. I want you to think outside that again. What is it when you embrace something? You accept it gladly, right? We talk about open arms because that's our physical presentation of it. But when you embrace something, it doesn't have to be with open arms. It can be with an open mind or an open heart, right? It's the embracing. There's a time to embrace things, and there's a time to turn away from those things, to shun those things, to not embrace them. I said the other day to somebody, I said, some people have you can have such an open mind that your brain falls out, right? There's a time to be open, and there's a time to, not embrace that. So this is not just the picture of the human hug. We talked about that. In verse 6, what is described as a way to approach all decisions men have in life? A time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away. The best description of these might be to the things that we see in those situations where the extreme and the negative is not followed by people. So I'll give you an example. How many times have we witnessed people that do not give up on, a relationship or an endeavor past the point that it was healthy? Okay? So you see how that can be a description of those words. The second one that was listed can be seen on display for any of you who have watched even a single episode of Hoarders, right? Because there's a time to get rid of stuff, people, right? So there's a time to get it, and there's a time to get rid of it. Again, you can see that, though, lived out in people who hold on to relationships and they hold on to stuff long after it's a healthy thing in their life and for those that are around them. But God has a plan. There's an appointed time within all of that God is in charge of. So verse 7, what is displayed next? So we got tear apart and to sow. Well, I will tell you this after reading some of the commentaries again. The word sow was used by many to narrow this down. Okay, so some are like, sewing must be what you have to sew your clothes after you've torn them apart because you were mourning, as he referenced back in the previous verse. I'm like, why would we get that? That doesn't even make sense. But it does make sense when we hear the word sew. Don't we immediately think of stitching and sewing cloth, right? There's an appropriate time for things to be separated. That's the tearing. And put back together. That's the sewing. So it's not just with your sewing machine and your ripper that he's talking about. It's beyond that. But you see how the words can make people narrow down to just that little event and try to find that little. It's like, no. Give the bigger concept. What does it mean to tear apart and to sew? All right? So the examples to demonstrate this also might be not just in a physical thing, but in our own lives. How about when, a child leaves home to join in a marriage? Right? Isn't that an example? Scriptures give us that in Genesis chapter 2. I'll just read verse 24. It says, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother. There's the tearing apart, and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. See the sewing? There was the tearing apart, and then there was the sewing together. So, again, we might get restrictive in our use of the words, and I'm asking you all to look at the bigger picture. What is the point behind it? All right? This can be true also, just as we've seen on the national stage, where nations or tribes it was them against the world, and maybe sometimes they got to separate from the tribe they were with to kind of join in a covenant or a treaty with another tribe or nation. All right, so there you have the tearing apart so that there can be a bonding together. So in verse 7, what is also true for human relationships? Time to be silent and a time to speak. So there's appointed time for everything we speak and don't speak. And of course, you know the jokes, ladies, that we're the ones to do all the speaking. Well, I am here to tell you that is not always true. I know plenty of men that do plenty of speaking all the time, okay? And I know plenty of women who don't express every single thought on their mind all the time. All right, so it's for humans, all of us, in both categories. But I will say this, that you need to be mindful before speaking to be sure that the Spirit is prompting your words and your timing to speak. I'm going to tell on myself here. I know you guys find it hard to believe I talk a lot, but I have been told. I was in a Bible study that they have a group where you have the person speak to the whole group, and then you would go into your individual groups, okay? And she wasn't speaking to me, although it felt like it at the moment. She was speaking to everybody. And she said, just because you have an answer to every question doesn't mean you need to share your answer in the group on every question. This was news to me. I thought the whole point in doing the homework was so I was going to be able to share what I had seen on every issue. And I was like, wow. So we all need to keep that in mind. Just because you have a revelation doesn't mean you need to be sharing every revelation all the time. So you guys get to be convicted if that applies to any of you all, just like I was. All right, in verse 8, what extremes of emotions are addressed? We got love and we got hate. And remember, again, these are the extremes of everything. So love is on one extreme and hate is on the other, and it's everything that's in between. Now, some people go, wow, why would we ever be allowed to hate anything? Because that's just, are there things God asks us to hate? Absolutely. Absolutely. We are to hate sin. We are to hate all kinds of things. All right? Again, the merism is for you to understand from the strongest of what we call love to the hate on the other end. Everything in between is always guided by and under God's appointed time. What's the last thing? This is not an emotion, but an activity that displayed exactly the same thing. It was described as a time for war and a time for peace. So these are the words that Solomon uses to describe the inclusiveness of responses covered in God's economy. So he did enough use here. There's nothing outside of this that people could go, well, Solomon, that was a pretty good list, but I can think of something that doesn't fall in your list. There's nothing. Solomon left nothing uncovered with this list. There's no person that could come along and go, well, that's good except for this thing I have over here. It's covered here. And that was the point, to make it so all-inclusive that we couldn't miss it. There are times in which war must be carried out for God's ultimate purposes. Now, I know this may be shocking, and I know there's even religions. Oh, God would never want war. We can't go to war. It's horrible. Okay, well, that's not what the scriptures describe for us. We can even look back in Deuteronomy. And I'll just read, this is chapter 20 of Deuteronomy, verses 10 through 13. When you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. Okay, so you're coming to fight, so there's a chance of war, but you're going to offer them peace first. Well, there's the extremes right there. If it, the city, agrees to make peace with you and opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall become your forced labor and shall serve you. So there's the conditions of peace. Surrender. It's pretty ultimate. It's not, peace treaty and we all just are going to share the well. Okay? It had some consequences. However, if it, the city, does not make peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. When the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall strike all the men in it with the edge of the sword. This is where some people say, well, that Old Testament God, that is just not the same God, after Christ came. It's all different. No, it is the same. He had his purposes. And if you were to go back and study that time in history, what was going on, what God was building, you would understand why war was a necessary part in its appointed time for what God was building and doing. Is it outside of our understanding and our compassion to fully grasp that? For me, it is. I can only speak for me. But Solomon reminds us we don't get to question that because God's got an appointed time of everything on both ends of that spectrum. So the answer is not always one way or the other. It is determined by God which way it will be. And we must follow God's prompting because sometimes it's for peace and sometimes it's for war. Sometimes we're to embrace and love and sometimes we are to hate what we see or experience, right? It's the gamut. Here's the other thing, ladies, when you're walking with the Lord. Today I may be called to love a certain thing or a certain person or a certain idea, and tomorrow God may change what I'm supposed to be responding to. I don't know it unless I'm walking in the Spirit and I'm prompted by His Spirit in me. I know people like their checklist. If you'll just give me my checklist, all the things I'm supposed to do and all the things I'm not supposed to do, I'm good with that. Right? Where do you think religions come from? Right? Oh, they're always got their list. Here's all the to-dos and here's all the to-don'ts. And if you do the to-dos and don't do the to-don'ts, you're good. You're in the club. Doesn't work like that with God. God says, no, you need to be walking with me because it is not always the same answer. I want you to be in relationship with me so that you know my answer and you know when my answer changes. That's a relationship. That's not a checklist. And many Christians struggle. They want their checklists. There isn't one. That makes sense? This is about you walking with the Lord. So after I've looked at those verses, I'm going to give one quote to you, or a view from one of the commentaries. I thought he did a really good job with this. It's in the Bible Knowledge Commentary. It says, Solomon followed his general statement that he gave us at the beginning about an appointed time for every event with a poem on 14 opposites, each of which happens in its time. The fact that Solomon utilized polar opposites in a multitude of sevens, so there's 14, two groups of 7, and began his list with birth and death is highly significant. The number 7 suggests the idea of completeness, and the use of polar opposites, a well-known poetical device called merism, suggests totality. See, that is where I got merisms from, because I didn't know merisms before that. I was like, what is a merism? All right, so the number, not just the things that were discussed, but the number that he uses also expresses completeness and totality. And I'm going to take you to one other place in Scripture where we also see this, and it's another wisdom book. So I'm just going to read this from Psalms, chapter 139. For the choir director, a psalm of David. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thoughts from afar. You scrutinize my path, which would be as he's walking, right? And my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there was a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before, and have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, Even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay hold of me. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me, and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light are alike to you, for you formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. Do you see the exact same thing being communicated here by David that Solomon is revealing to us in the beginning chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes? Right? He's not talking about, well, when I was walking along the path, God was watching me, and when I was laying down. He's saying no matter which of those two events and everything in between. And he ends with knowing God knew about every moment of my life before one of them happened. Did I mention we were going to talk about God's sovereignty when we started studying Ecclesiastes? Here it is on display. So we see both King David and King Solomon identify clearly God is in control of all events unfolding in creation. Because God is in control of all creation, Solomon now returns to the question facing all men. What is the advantage to life? Now think about this. I pondered this morning, so it's not in my notes yet. What sometimes comes to your mind if you really embrace the thought that God already has a plan and it's already going to happen God's way? What am I supposed to do then? What's in it for me? That really is the whole question that Solomon's come to at the end of his life, and it's why he's walking us through with him. What point is it then? What part do I play? What is my advantage in life? Do you see why that's the question that he has? So what? And that's what Solomon is walking through, that he's come to the conclusion and the question he has, and he's walking you through with him for us to have the answer in the end. Okay? That is the question. So we're going to go on now in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and we'll start reading in verse 9, and we'll read through verse 15. What profit is there to the worker from that which he toils? I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men, with which to occupy themselves. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, and there is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear him. That which has been already, and that which will be, has already been. For God seeks what has passed by. Practically self-explanatory. We're going to go back and we're going to unpack each of those verses because they all build into that culmination. So in verse 9, what is the rhetorical question posed by Solomon? What profit is there for the worker from that in which he toils? So we're back to the whole work thing again. Labor, work, the vanity associated. So that's the rhetorical question. We don't need to spend more time on it. We already know what the question's for. So then we go to verse 10. What had Solomon seen? Because that's what he gives us next. He says, I've seen the task which God has given. So let's ask ourselves, what is a task? A job?
My translation says burden.
A burden. Because many days the tasks are seen as burdensome, but not always. that's a lot of tasks altogether, right? It's not a single task. Raising a family is, there's so many tasks in there, we could all write a book, right? So a task would be a piece of work that is assigned, usually to you individually, falling to, meaning a task that falls to you to do. It's an expected duty from a person. So like say I'm a manager at work, I might give you a task, and then I give you a task, and I give you a task, right? The whole project has to be whatever the focus of the company is that we work for. But then we break the work out into individual tasks. Who gives the task according to that verse? It's a God-given task. Who did God give the task to? The sons of men. Why did God give those tasks? To occupy them. You ever do that with a little one, a little 2-year-old, you give them something, go paint that fence with water. And they're thrilled. They got the brush and they're painting away, and of course 5 minutes later, it didn't look, right? Kind of that's where we are, ladies. I hate to say that, but that's kind of where we are. So God gives man work to fill his time on earth. That's the point of it. That's why you do what you do every day, because he gives you a task and you're expected to carry it out every day. Verse 11, Solomon reiterates a central theme in chapter 3 here. How? He has made everything appropriate in its time. He doesn't want us to miss this point. You think he's kind of reiterating because he doesn't want you to miss the point? He started chapter 3 with it, and now he's mentioning it yet again. But what else does he add this time? He has also set eternity in their heart. So what is eternity? If you were to describe what eternity is to someone, how would you describe it? Something that goes on after this time forever, right? Eternity means so far, there's no end to it. It goes so far. There's no conclusion to it. It's kind of like dusting at my house. It will be there for eternity. It's never going to be complete, okay? So man lives his life on earth with an innate knowledge that there is something after this life. So what is the limitation of knowledge that God gives to man? Yet so that man will not find what? Wait, whoa. We're not supposed to find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. Doesn't that kind of seem contrary to what we've been told about God? Isn't he always trying to reveal everything to us? Aren't I supposed to know everything? Apparently, God has secrets, and he's letting me know. Not your business. I don't like that answer sometimes. I just have to tell y'all. But that's what's being said here. It's not any of your business. Not in the big picture. It is not your business. Okay? It is God's plan that man does not know all things God is doing in his creation from the beginning of creation to the fulfillment of that creation. We are each a part. Let me give you a picture. We are a part of a beautiful tapestry and need to know only what our part in that is now, and we don't need to know how it relates to the whole. He is the creator and the artist, and we can trust what part we have to play by trusting in him. Now, I don't know about you all. This might just be a problem I struggle with. I want to know why before I do it. Why am I doing this? Why am I not doing this? And if you don't show me the big why, maybe I just won't do it. Rebellious heart, that's the same little girl that said, just take that food and give that to somebody else. Right? That's the point. He says, you know what? I'm God. I've just given you this part. You're the thread, or for those of you who do puzzles, you're the piece of puzzle, and you fit right here. Trust me, this is where you fit. I want you to be in the big puzzle. I want you to see the puzzle. I want you to see the tapestry at the end, and you'll get a chance, but not right now. I can promise you, if I knew some of the things that would happen in my life earlier, I would not have embraced them. Right? It would not have been a good thing, and God knew that. It would not have been a good thing for me to know ahead of time. So he gave me just what he needed me to know at the appropriate time. And now I'm being reminded that that's what he was doing, in case I get a little off track and I think, well, I'm just going to learn a lot more, and then I'll be more prepared. Well, maybe, but he'll make it clear. We can see the desire of men to know about eternity, right? So there's, it doesn't matter to me what's next or whatever. That is just not true. People do want to know. And they want to know what is in the bigger plan. And we can even see that with people's desire to acquire human knowledge, right? Why do they go to school? Why do you study the sciences? Why do you study philosophy then? Why do you, right? All of these things, because you are trying to figure out the bigger picture. You realize that you're this big in this massive thing, and you're like, I just want to know a little bit more. Now, sometimes they seek that and don't seek the author. And we talked about the list of all the philosophers that did not really end well, right? Because they weren't really willing to accept he wasn't going to let them know everything. And in their rebellion, well, then I'm just not going to go along with the plan. Okay, well, that was the plan. You went along with it even though you thought you weren't, right? So that's what they do to themselves. All right. So the next is verse 12 then. Without knowledge of all God is doing, what does Solomon say is also true? I know that there's nothing better for them. Who's the them? These men that want to know everything, right, including himself, than to... So man is to do two things here. One, rejoice and do good in his own lifetime. Don't be trying to figure out the big picture if that's not what he's given you to do. What is that a picture of? When you can rejoice in the thing that he's put on your plate. What is that called when I do that? When I can rejoice and I'm rejoicing in this thing he's given me. How about contentment? Is that the ultimate contentment? I'm not looking for more. I'm not disappointed that there wasn't more or that there should have been less. Right? I am right where I need to be, and I accept what he's given me, and I can rejoice. That's the definition of contentment. To rejoice in what he's given me day to day. So without knowing the bigger picture and how our circumstances fit into the larger puzzle, we are to rejoice and focus on our own time. What are we to do with what God gives us? That's our question. I'm going to take you to Ephesians. I'm going to read just a little bit in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. Not as a result of works, so that one may boast, for we are all his workmanship, created in Jesus Christ for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them. Was God the same when he was talking with Solomon as he is when he's talking to us through Ephesians? Exactly the same. That's what your focus is, and in that you will find contentment. So back to Ecclesiastes in verse 13. What else did we find? He says, moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. Right? So when man can daily have his basic needs met, like something to eat and something to drink, and then gets to see good in all his labor, what is that? If we say he sees good in all his labors, could we be assuming that man is seeing good from his perspective, or is it from God's perspective? If it's a gift from God, it would be good from God's perspective. That's the ultimate contentment, is to have our needs met from God, be content in what he asks us to do from God. That is the gift from God. To each and every one of us, that is the gift. So the definition of good is always established as by God. Man is to focus on work in this life with the focus on eternity. But do we understand the big picture all the time? It just told us that we weren't. So we just do what God tells us to do every day, knowing his focus is for eternity. But can we sometimes see when we are letting our human nature get involved in that and that we're making decisions that are not based on eternity? He gives most of us enough wisdom and discernment to know that part. Okay? So he gives us guardrails along the way. He doesn't expect us to just be thrown out there and, free fall in the wind. He gives us guardrails. But ultimately, he says that's where you turn for your contentment. Verse 14. Unlike man's work that comes and goes in his lifetime, what is true about that is done by God? It remains forever, whatever it is. Whatever the work is that God is working on remains forever. So an example for us, this is a simple example. God puts it on my heart to share the gospel with someone. I share the gospel with someone. Am I the reason they come to faith? Nope. God did that. But was I faithful in the work that he gave me to do that day? Yes, I was. That work is lasting forever. Now, let me share something with you. If I share because God's told me to share with somebody and they don't come to faith, do I get less credit? No. Because the outcome wasn't on me to begin with. How freeing is that? It's not up to me. It's always and only up to him. But he invites me. Right? That's why sometimes I have a problem when they do an interpretation of the work or the task to be burdensome. It's not always a burden. It's a task. It's someone's decision to call it burdensome or not. But when we do his work, we're told that's the light work. Okay? So what impact does the work of man have in the end? There is nothing to add to it. There's nothing we can take away from it. That whole example of sharing the gospel, there's nothing I can do to say it better, to say it more, to say it louder, to say it right. I can scream from the mountaintops. I can nag in their ear all day long. I can do everything in my power. Is it going to change the outcome? Absolutely not. God has a plan. But what did he ask you to do in the moment? That's what he's looking for. Obey me. Be sensitive to my spirit and walk in the spirit with me, and we'll get some stuff done, girlfriend. That's what he's going to do. There is no need to correct or to fix what's perfect, right? If God's already got a plan and he's got it going, we're just joining him, right? It's like getting in the boat and just going down the river. I'm not trying to go across it. I'm not trying to go backwards. I just get in and I just let him take me down the river. That's the picture. God has one goal for man. It says, for God what? So worked that men should fear him. All that God has created and made evident in his creation should bring the fear of God into the heart of every man. Let's just stand there for a minute. What does it mean to fear? Okay? Reverence. Let's look at what Paul tells us in Romans. In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 21. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God. See, that's the opposite of fearing God. Not honoring him as God. Or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. So I think that's the contrast. You can be the fool, or you can honor, which is fear God. There's two choices there. That's kind of the black and white picture that's being put out there. Does that make sense? Does that kind of tie up verse 14 before we go on to 15? That's what it means to fear God, to honor God. I don't want to disappoint God. For those of you who had a parent that, maybe that was the disciplinarian, you did not want to disappoint the parent. Sometimes it was, the fear of a spanking, whatever. Ultimately, though, didn't you learn a respect and you didn't want to disappoint them, right? It took on a different meaning of, I don't want to disappoint them. That's the relationship with God. Fear him so that you have a desire to please him and honor him. So Ecclesiastes, verse 15, from God's perspective, what is true? He says, that which, this is the easy verse, right? That which has been made already, and that which will be, has already been, for God seeks what is passed by. Okay, again, this will make sense as we keep it in context to what Solomon has been talking about. So, what is it that is which has already passed by? What is, when you use those words, if you were to use these words that Solomon's using here, what do you mean by it? It's already passed by. From God's perspective, let's say we're talking about time, because isn't that what he's been talking about? The time that man lives in? He's saying, prior to that time, that which has passed by, I would say that's prior to God's creation. It's already done. It's already passed by. God's in control of it. Don't need to know about it. And what is that which will be? If we're thinking in the big terms about what Solomon's been talking about, right? It's after this creation. What will be? What is coming? So from God's perspective, these two events have already been set. From the big picture, they are set by God. Previous creation, after creation, already done. So what does God seek then? What has passed by? So what connects the past, right, the pre-creation, to the future after creation? That which is happening now, or in the moment, or in each day that knits man's life, the life of man together. That which occurs in the measurement of time from man's perspective. God seeks man to do labor and to use the time given in God's way because man has a fear of God. God will judge those works as seen in the moment of time, right? And will call the past into account in its due time. So let me give you this picture. Prior creation, right? Future creation. Within creation, time passes every hour, every day, every week, every month, every season, every year, every millennium, right? Time is, time is passing. That's what God's going to be looking at. That's where his measurement's going to be coming from, is what's passing by. Does he already know? Yeah. But he's still going to measure what's passing by. That makes sense in the context of everything else that he's been describing. He knows, but he's still going to hold account for what's passing by. You're going to be held account for the labor. And account in terms of, were you obedient? Did you do the things? Yay. Did you miss an opportunity? Well, there's no reward for that, but hey, there's tomorrow for some. That's what he's going to be looking at for measurement in the end. That's what's passing by. Time is what's passing by. That's what he's looking at. That's what he's going to measure. That make enough sense? And if anybody else has a better explanation of that verse, you just come right on up here and we can have a conversation, because that was a really hard verse.
Even though he knows, he's watching to see it. Yeah, it's our free will.
Do you do that with your children? You have children? You raise children? Did you sometimes have to watch them do things so that you know whether they were... sometimes did you watch them when they didn't necessarily know you were watching? And maybe your whole point was you wanted to know, what decisions do they make if they don't think mom's watching? Are they making good decisions? And I'm not saying God's not watching us. That's obviously not the comparison. If there's that word at all, it's, are you going to be obedient today or not? And when you do, we call that sanctification. And I can promise you, ladies, there are many days I get more sanctification opportunities than I want. Okay? That's what it's about. Are you doing the things he's asked you to do? Are you being Christ-like in your response? All right, the list is, again, there's no checklist. Every day it might be, I just need you to stay home and to be still. And for some of us, like myself, that's a really hard request. I might not even understand why. I mean, he gives us little glimpses of things that we don't understand in the moment, and then we get to, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I didn't take that flight. You know, I'm so glad I wasn't on that side of the highway. I'm so glad I didn't go to dinner with so-and-so, and they're now homesick with the flu, or whatever the situation is. We get to see little glimpses of that all the time. We didn't know necessarily that he was prompting us, but sometimes there's the prompting, and we've responded, and we're like, wow, that was the prompting. So he gives us little glimpses, and I think he does that to encourage us so that we'll do that more. Just like with prayer. I mentioned prayer to somebody one time, and they were like, oh, I don't think that's big enough. That's not a big enough event to take to prayer. And I said, well, first of all, I didn't know we were on prayer quotas. That was my first question, right? And secondly, I'm like, how is it that you possibly think you can be trained to take the big things in God to prayer if you haven't been practiced in taking all the little things to God in prayer? That's like me getting up and running a marathon when I barely run to my car. Can't do it. I can't do it successfully. So I need to do the little things as I build towards that. So that's what I have for verse 15. We are looking at life as it passes. That's what God's looking at each of us as we pass by this life. I mean, did he look at what Solomon did? Did we learn what he did with Solomon and what he's told Solomon about what he was going to do because of what Solomon did? That's a picture of it right there. So Solomon's already told us that happened back in the end of chapter 2, right? And now he's in chapter 3, and he's saying, that's what God measures, the time that's going by. So now we go to the end of Ecclesiastes, and we're in chapter 3. We're going to do verses 16 through 22. Furthermore, I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. And I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man, for a time for every matter and for every deed is there. I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place. All came from the dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward, and the breath of the beast descends downward to the earth? I have seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after him? Got that theme there at the end, tying it up. But let's go back to verse 16. Knowing God measures a man's labor in an eternal perspective, what does Solomon observe? He says, furthermore, so beyond what I just talked about, this thing of God measuring time and watching what I'm doing as we go through time, that's my conclusion. But furthermore, right, in addition to that, what does he say? I have seen under the sun that the place of justice there's wickedness, and the place of righteousness there's wickedness. So how does Solomon introduce this truth? He says, I have seen. Where did this witness take place? Under the sun, which we know to be on earth. So I've seen this with my own eyes on earth. What should exist on earth? In the place of justice. So he identifies what should be there. In this place of justice, this thing that should exist, what occurs instead of the justice? Wickedness. What else should exist on earth? in the place of righteousness, right? This thing of righteousness should exist. That's the ideal. But what prevails instead of righteousness? Wickedness. All right? I don't think we need to do a dissertation on this. Do you people see this in your life all the time? This is our, yeah, right? There should be justice. There should be fairness. Everything, if the good people should get good and the bad people should get bad, right? Everybody should be held to account. Everybody should be held to the same standard, right? Is a general thought of life for man. But we know that doesn't happen, right? Instead of justice, it's not that there's just like, there's no justice, but it seems to be the opposite of justice happened. The victim didn't get what they were supposed to, but the perpetrator got all the good stuff in the end. There's something so wrong with that, right? We can all relate to having heard those stories and see it even in our own world. So verse 17, what future event brings consolation to Solomon? Because he's witnessing the same thing we witness and we see. He says what? God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man. God will not have to rush his justice. Why? Right? There's a time for every matter and for every deed. There is a purpose in God's plan for what is wicked, both in his future judgment, when he will be justified to be the judge of what went on, of those, as well as in supporting God's plan for the present circumstances. So in every event on earth, God uses the acts of the wicked to continually bring about his ultimate purposes. And for those of you who are studying here verse by verse, what did we just discover in Matthew? Judas was there doing what was wicked, but God used it for his purpose. So if we can believe that in the ultimate event of the crucifixion of Jesus, can we believe that in every other event that seems to us to be unrighteous and unjust? Yes, we can. And if you knew me, you would know that's a really, really hard thing for me to say. I want everything to be fair and just, and it simply isn't here. But again, I've finally accepted I don't see the whole tapestry. I just got to stay straight and narrow on what my thread is and what I've been called to do. My weaving, thread isn't straight, it like weaves in and out, right? I need to weave in and out where I'm supposed to. And that's what he gives me to do. And if I can accept that, man, the burden is light. Because when I had all those other burdens and I was going to make it fair and I was going to make it just, I was miserable because I couldn't do it. It doesn't happen. God is in control. Verse 18, what conclusion does Solomon say God will see? I said to myself, concerning these sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are what? Just animals. In that sense. Now, does that mean that somehow we can scripturally say, see, man's the same as an animal. There really is no difference. No, that is not what he's saying. He's using it in a very specific way. Verse 19, Solomon clarifies what is common to man and to beast in that way. The fate is the same. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of the beast are the same. As one dies, so the other dies. In what sense? Right? In our physical death. Right? Notice that he uses an interesting phrase. He says, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage. So let's look at that. What does it mean they have the same breath? What's that? He breathed life into them, and we would get that back in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, where we read, then God, the Lord God, formed man of dust from the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So there you have the breath of life. That's what he's talking about. A few chapters later in verse 16, verse 17, behold, even I am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish. So it wasn't just man that was destroyed in the flood. It was every living creature. Every living creature then has the same breath of life as described here. Genesis chapter 7, verse 15 says, so they went into the ark to Noah by twos of all flesh, in which was the breath of life. So just in case you think I made that up, I just wanted to give you the Genesis account that breath of life has this meaning. Anything that's living has the breath of life. Both man and beast have the same breath of life. When it is gone, they are dead. For all man's wisdoms and works, the end is still the same, death. Do you remember Solomon talked about that in chapter 2 when he talked about both the wise man and the fool suffer the same fate? It is death. So he said there's no advantage in that. Both are just passing through this world, and in that way they do not change the path set by God. All is vanity to think that we can change that. Verse 20, what other parallel is in death of man and beast, and how is it seen? He says, all go to the same place. All came from the dust and returned to the dust. And where would we look for that again? Genesis chapter 2, verse 19. Out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called a living creature, that was its name. And you'd have to look at the earlier verses when we know that man was produced out of the dust of the ground. Made from matter, going to go back to matter. Okay? Not that it matters. I made a funny. All right, verse 21. What rhetorical question does Solomon pose? This is an interesting one. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of beast ascends downward? What do you think that means? This is a little harder. What is the breath of man here? What he's been talking about. It was the breath that gave man and beast in Genesis. It's the same term that's being used. So it's my breath that I breathe when I'm alive physically. So what is the breath of the beast? That which was allow them to live physically. So when the breath of life leaves the man, as when it leaves the animal, there is no outward manifestation to show any difference in the breath of life. Right? From me looking on, it looks exactly the same. No more breathing, they're both dead. In man's physical state alone, he is like the beast that God created. In the living and in the dying. We get the breath. When the breath goes away, we die. Okay? The reference to the breath of man ascending upwards and the breath of beast ascending downwards to the earth, and what does that mean? It seems to want to take us to something else, right? It seems to want to take us to what we consider the spirit, the eternal part of man. But then that would say that animals have that, which we don't find that anywhere else. So I did my best. So this could mean a view of the breath of man being the spirit of man, that which lives eternally. There is no indication that this view is true for animals from anywhere else in Scripture. So we'll have to leave that one unanswered. For those of you who have animals that are probably more important to you than people, that we're not going to answer that question. Okay? Solomon has been talking about the judgment of the wicked as he gets here. So there's no guarantee for men that their spirit will do what? Ascend. Does that make sense? The beast we know necessarily, there's no promise. When they both die, they look the same. But we can't assume that the spirit of man always ascends. God knows which man's spirit will ascend and which one will descend. Man does not know or have the ability to judge this based on what his activities on earth are. Works are not what causes the breath of man to ascend. Verse 22. Don't you think that's important? Because he's just been talking about doing the works I ask you to do the works I ask you to do the things I want you to do. Oh, but by the way, that's not what determines whether that spirit's going to go up or down. It's not determined by your works. Verse 22, what is Solomon's conclusion? I have seen that nothing is better, that man should be happy in his activities, for this is his lot. So the activities of man to be pleasing to God, to be happy with the labor each day for that purpose. During a man's life on earth, what is true for what follows man on earth? He says, for who will bring him to see what will occur after him? Man is never in control of what happens on earth, not only while he's here, but after he's gone. That is not the goal that man should spend his life activities striving towards. We know it here. Can we know it here? Can we live this every day? Knowing we know what's coming for each and every one of us, right? There's a day. What do I do between now and then? I don't know. He's going to tell me today. Do I need to worry about what tomorrow's going to be? Doesn't do me any good. I can't change it. I can just do what I'm supposed to do today. Can you walk in that obedience every day? How do I walk in that obedience every day? How do we start our morning to walk in that obedience every day? How about we pray about it? Let's check in with the guy who's got an assignment for us today. Let God help direct. In the moments during the day when I think I might know, or I think there might be some, let me stop and pray about that. Maybe I have something that I know there should be an answer to and I can't seem to come up with it. I am praying. I'm not finding it there. I'm not finding it in the Word. Maybe He's put somebody of godly counsel in my life that I can turn to and have a conversation with. Maybe there's somebody I need to mentor and help them find the answers to life to do what He's asked them to do today. Ladies, those are the things that have eternal significance. I do not care how great your degrees were, how many jobs that you had, how many I love you, I call them I love you certificates on the wall of all those accomplishments that the earth has given to you, how big the house is, how fancy the car is, how beautiful the shoe selections were. None of that matters in eternity. Were you the godly woman He created you to be in the life you lived here? Do you do what you're supposed to do every day? Are you the daughter you need to be, the sister you need to be, the aunt you need to be, the mom you need to be, the wife you need to be? Again, not to put more burden on you. That's not the goal. Eliminate what doesn't need to be there, and you will know what you need to do that day. He will put it on your heart, and you will know what you are supposed to do. End with one short story. I started a Bible study for the first time. New mom, you know how it goes. You're not getting sleep. I'm nursing. I'm exhausted beyond belief. And now I'm going to start this Bible study. I've told you that doing a wisdom book was not the first time I did not show wisdom in my life. It was crazy, right? That was crazy. And of course, the morning nap, I'd be like, okay, take my shower, get the dishes done. She'd get up and I'd be like, I didn't get anything else done. I didn't get my Bible study done. You know, the week would come around and it wouldn't be done. And I like to do everything. I like my checklist, ladies. That's why I can, say don't have checklists, because I do that. So God convicted me one morning on the morning nap. He said, I want you to do the Bible study. Yeah, I'm thinking, that doesn't even make sense. When am I going to get my shower and do the dishes if I waste that time getting this Bible study done, right? This checklist thing. I did it. I did my Bible study. And I'm here to tell you, it wasn't even 2 days later. That night, I don't know, Stephen asked me some question. And I said, you know what's really weird? I have gotten everything done the last 2 days. I can't tell you how that happened. That was a miracle, because there is no other explanation. I can promise you that He didn't stop the sun in the sky and make the days longer. He rewarded me doing the thing that needed to be done, that had eternal significance, and ignoring, in that sense, in those moments, when those two things came into conflict, He said, I want you to do this one. Don't worry about this one. So I'm not telling you this one's always going to get done. But what I am telling you is at the end of the day, this one didn't matter. This one did. That's the focus. That's an encouragement for you. I know our world is filled with all these other pressures and burdens, and we're trying to do this, and we're trying to do that, and we're trying to be the best at that. You all have a heart to serve in that way. Do not let yourselves do the busy work that you have not prayed about and been confirmed. That's what he has for me. That's what I'm supposed to do. And you can let those burdens go. When those things don't get done, they weren't that important. Not in eternity. I mean, I didn't even bring all the list of these that you could find online. How many people on their deathbed, right? I just wish that I would have spent time in relationship, not chasing all the stuff, because it didn't bring satisfaction in the end. Don't leave that up here and know that up here, ladies. Live it out. Live it in your heart. At the end of today, know that the labor God gave you to do, you did. And he saw it. Nobody else has to see it, just him. It's you and him. That's what Solomon's saying. That's where the advantage to life, the profit of life is. Doing the labor God has for you and staying focused on that. How joyful can we be? That, ladies, is where ultimate contentment comes from. If we had a blanket, I'd give you a blanket, we'd wrap ourselves in contentment. That's what it can look like. So as I finish on that, who here has a desire to end our day of being in the Word in prayer? Prayer for each and every person here to take this and let it be in their heart, as well as to bring us back next week to gather together as women that desire to do the labor that God has for us.